staying true to America's national destiny, the voice of the awakening. Your host, Bishop E. W. Jackson.
And I am he. Great to be with you again today, folks. I hope you're having a wonderful Monday and had a great weekend. We've got a lot to talk about. And here's a piece of news that I was unaware of. You know, we've just had this big rail derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. Apparently now there's another one, but thank God there were no dangerous chemicals that were being transported. Apparently there have been several of these in Ohio recently. Here's what I did not know. Our rail cars are now being made by China. Yeah, the rail car industry in America is being supplied by communist China. And not only are they supplying the rail cars, but they have been caught using rail cars as, in effect, monitoring devices. Putting recording devices in them, putting cameras in them. I'm not making it up, folks. They have been caught trying to gather data by planting listening devices in these rail cars that they're making. Now that's secondary to the fact that we seem to now be having this unusual number of accidents that are happening with these rail cars. And so all of this kind of raises a question, doesn't it? Once again, we find ourselves dependent upon communist China for an essential service that is required to transport goods across this country. And they're in control of it. I mean, for all practical purposes, they're making the rail cars now. And by the way, the rail car company that is making it is explicitly state-owned. It's called the China Railway Rolling Stock Corp. And they've won 4 out of 5 transit rail car contracts, major contracts, since 2014. And in fact, now they've made, this is just what I know now. This is not all there is, but this is what I know. They've been making rail cars for the transit systems of Washington, D.C. They've been making rail cars for Boston, for the city of Boston. And they've been making rail cars for New York and Philadelphia. And Philadelphia. Now, here again, you know that if they're making rail cars for those 4 cities, they're making rail cars for other places as well. There's no question about it. So quietly behind the scenes, I mean, we know China manufactures a lot of stuff for this country, but quietly behind the scenes, they are actually deeply embedded into our transportation system. And look, some are arguing that this, and frankly, it makes sense to me, that we've got idiots in this country who are buying their rail cars thinking they're getting a bargain, when what they're really doing is getting a Trojan horse. That China is using these rail cars like they use everything else that they are involved in our country to weaken us and strengthen themselves. And so now there's a question, with all these accidents happening, I guess some are arguing, and I've said before, we need a national security audit Little did I know that it would extend this far as well. And, of course, with Pete Buttigieg in charge of our transportation systems, his father was a communist. I've said before, yeah, Joseph Buttigieg was the founder of the Antonio Gramsci International Society. Antonio Gramsci is probably the most renowned communist, second only to Karl Marx. And Pete Buttigieg's father founded the society that was intended to honor Antonio Gramsci, Italian communist. I would say the apple has not fallen far from the tree, because Pete Buttigieg is, for all practical purposes, as far as I'm concerned, is a communist as well. But then it doesn't surprise us, because the Democrat Party really has become a de facto communist party. They're a collectivist party. They don't believe in individual liberty. They believe in collectivism. That's what identity politics is all about. Identity politics is all about collectivism. But this stuff, folks, there is an article. By the way, this news came out a while ago, but you know what happens? It gets suppressed. I'm looking at an article from 2019 that goes into pretty good detail about the involvement of China in our transportation system. How many news agencies reported on this? Because, you see, China is so bought into our economy at this point, and they bought up so many people that, just like the NBA. Oh, no, you just don't. See, Bishop Jackson, you don't fully understand. You don't have sufficient knowledge to understand what's really going on. You know that. So we're not going to get into that, because that's beyond your pay grade. While the country gets sold out to a bunch of communist thugs, aided by everybody from the President of the United States down to some dummy bouncing a basketball on a wooden floor. Yeah, I said it because I mean it just as I said it, because to me, you don't have the sense to realize where your bread is buttered, that the liberty, the opportunity, the freedom that you have is the result of this wonderful nation that we have, and you're going to denounce our country, and you're going to defend a communist, totalitarian slave state, in effect, then yeah, you're just a dummy bouncing a ball on a wooden floor. That's exactly what you are. And by the way, that is not only directed at LeBron James, but everybody else involved in that enterprise who has basically given cover to these communist thugs. And now, okay, we know they're in sports. We know they're in our university system. We know they're manufacturing a lot of our medical supplies and pharmaceuticals. They're in our transportation system too. Is there any part of our economy that we haven't given over to them? I mean, we owe them a ton of money. Oh, that's right. But I'm not supposed to say any of this, because that makes me a racist and a xenophobe. No. Giving you the facts and the truth about what's going on simply makes me a truth teller. And they can't handle the truth. Back in a moment.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, the political battle over the Norfolk Southern train accident has now moved to debates about rules and regulations, and once again it appears that progressive bureaucrats hold to the cliche, never let a crisis go to waste. First, let's look at what we know. According to the preliminary report from the National Transportation Safety Board, the derailment in Ohio occurred because of an overheating wheel set. It was detected by a wayside safety device only after it had reached dangerous levels. Nothing in the report suggests that anything unprofessional or criminal resulted in derailment. It is likely this crisis will encourage federal and state officials to reevaluate railway and railroad inspections. Second, the Department of Transportation has now proposed policy changes. It doesn't appear that any of the suggestions would have made any difference in the accident. There seems to be some valid reasons to consider some of the proposals that range from paid sick leave to protection of union jobs from automation, but none of these proposals would have prevented the accident. We've seen this before whenever there's been a highly publicized shooting. All sorts of laws are proposed that wouldn't have stopped the shooter, but are put forward because we need to do something more than thoughts and prayers. From what I've read, doing something by adding more regulations might make the problem worse. If transporting hazardous materials like vinyl chloride by rail become too expensive, the only alternative would be to transport it by truck, which would be more dangerous. You know, over the last few weeks, there's been lots of finger-pointing and political posturing. None of this has helped the people of East Palestine, Ohio, and all the politics surrounding this accident won't keep Americans who live near train tracks any safer. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
120 witch doctors come to Christ. This is Bible League International. In Indonesia, Pastor Tandi invited a witch doctor on the island of Papua to hear the gospel. The man came with 120 apprentices, men and women learning witchcraft. And after hearing the gospel preached, they all accepted Jesus and are growing as believers, but they need Bibles. You can send one today for only $5. $50 sends 10, every gift matched. Call 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or give it sendbiblesnow.org. This is Bible League International. Many women in the Middle East are treated as less valuable, forced to marry young, and denied an education, meaning that many cannot read or write. So Bible League is giving them the gift of literacy and dignity and showing them God's great love. Magda was asked by her husband to skip these literacy classes, but she endured and something beautiful came about. Learn what she did to win her extremist husband over. Hear it all now. It's only 15 minutes and free of charge at BibleLeague.org/podcast. BibleLeague.org/podcast.
The Awakening. The Awakening. Download and listen at your leisure with the podcast page at AFR.net. Now, back to our host, Bishop E.W. Jackson.
Now, by the way, folks, tomorrow on my National Awakening Coalition conference call, the guest is going to be Gordon Chang, and we're going to be talking about China. So if you'd like to tune into that call, that's at 12 noon Eastern time, and that's not a radio program, that's just a conference call, and you'll have an opportunity to ask him questions, and that's go to standamerica.us to get the call-in number for that. And look, I'm not trying to create hysteria over this. But I am day by day realizing it's worse than we know. It really is. Because if we were to end up in a military confrontation with China, I am concerned that we have already given up so much in the way of strategic advantage that I don't want to fathom it. I don't want to think about that. And I know it needs to be corrected. So I mentioned to you several cities that they won contracts in. Well, apparently Los Angeles and Chicago can be added to that list. And they're winning these big contracts by underbidding American companies. Well, no wonder. They're communists. And they're not doing this to make money. They're doing this for strategic advantage. Right? And that's what this is about. So of course they can underbid American companies. Why are we allowing ourselves to give them access to our economy and our most fundamental infrastructure in that way? Why are we even doing that? Well, look, it gets worse than that. There have been accusations and there's suspicion that China embeds, as I said before, spying technology in certain products that they're selling to the American people and selling our government. And so the Pentagon found out that the Chinese company ZTE and Huawei, they were using their telephones for spying purposes, using them to literally spy on the American people, spy on anybody who gets the phones. And they also found that U.S. military installations in Afghanistan were using Chinese-made video cameras, and those video cameras were discovered to have a back door that the communist Chinese could continue to access. In other words, they could see on military installations everything they wanted to see because we gave them access. I mean, folks, I wish I were making this up. I really do, because you just shudder to how can we be that stupid? Well, no. Maybe the right question is, how can we be that corrupt? Because when you've got the Vice President of the United States with his son running around the world selling his influence to the highest bidders, none of this should surprise us. Although I have to admit, it is still shocking to think that we're using video cameras on military installations that are made by communist China. I mean, it's just one of those things that you just think, well, okay, either the people responsible for this are just as dumb as a rock or dumber, or there's something going on here and our country's being sold out. I mean, we're not talking about video cameras being used at an amusement park. We're talking about video cameras being used on a highly sensitive military installation. And if they're being used on that one, do you think they're not being used on others? How many video cameras, how many monitoring systems are being used in sensitive military installations that were made by communist China? I mean, folks, this stuff, and look, and you know what? To be very honest, I don't blame the Chinese for this. I mean, they're our enemies. What would you expect them to do? If American officials are dumb enough to give them that access, what do you think they're going to say? Well, no, let's take the high road and let's not take advantage of them. I fault our own officials who don't have enough patriotism and common sense to say, we're not installing cameras from communist China. We're not buying cameras from communist China. And it's about time we had some federal legislation to put a stop to this, having China make critical parts of our infrastructure, like our transportation system. What do we have them do next? Build our roads, build our airplanes? Why not build our nuclear weapons force? Why not build our tanks force? Train our military force. I mean, it galls me, folks. It really does. It just galls me. Okay, well, at any rate, and look, remember, this is on the heels of finding out. Oh, and by the way, there is a wonderful article. I wish I could send it to all of you, but it is in. Let me find this source. It is in a magazine called The Bulletin. It's thebulletin.org, and it's really the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. It's an article written by Nicholas Wade, who's an atomic scientist, and he goes through a detailed analysis of whether this COVID-19, as they call it, came from the Wuhan laboratory or came from a wet market or was a leap from an animal onto a human. And he makes the case, I think, conclusively that this is clearly engineered. And by the way, that article was written last year. No, 2 years ago. Almost 2 years ago. When we were being told, oh, anybody who says that is a conspiracy theorist. They're an idiot. They're crazy. That's dumb. No, but he asked the question. In fact, he raises the question, something we've talked about. This is what communism does. This is what Marxism does. It politicizes everything. And he says, This should never have been a question that was ever part of politics. This is strictly a scientific question, and he lays out all of the claimed scientists saying, well, it's obvious that it was not created in a laboratory. He said because they had absolutely no basis for making those claims other than politics. Oh, and by the way, and Fauci behind them saying anybody who says otherwise will not be getting any grants from the NIHID or from the National Institutes of Health or anybody else. Well, you know, of course, the Wuhan laboratory will still, they'll still get grants from us, of course. I mean, just think about this. Fauci bragging about how great the scientists at the Wuhan laboratory were. Commending them. They're very reputable scientists. And funding, yes, absolutely funding gain-of-function research. There is no question about that. And to say otherwise is to tell a big, bold-faced lie. That's what they were doing. They were doing it under the guise of, this is how we figure out how to stop these viruses when they do emerge from nature. That's what they were doing it under the guise of that. And this guy, Nicholas Wade, goes into great scientific detail. Some of it, frankly, is a bit beyond me. Some of you may have a facility for this stuff, or maybe you're scientifically inclined or you are scientists. But most of it really boils down to fairly common sense issues that a layperson can understand. I mean, he makes the same argument I've made. So you're telling me it's just a coincidence that this virus happens to emerge right near the Wuhan laboratory, but it had absolutely nothing to do with that. That's just mere coincidence. It really was just one of these. And then he goes through the steps, the evolutionary steps and the mutation steps that it takes for a virus, these are SARS viruses, a virus to finally make it to the point where it can actually attach itself to a human cell. He said, and they go through several stages of mutation before that can happen. He said, but you don't see that in this. You don't see that in this COVID-19. You don't see those stages of development. Oh, he said, and you can't find any instances of the earlier version in other animals. And it's, folks, I think, look, I think the only question is, was it just a pure attack on us? And if you add to the fact that they stopped people from Wuhan from traveling to other parts of China, but allowed people from Wuhan to travel all over the world, then I think you've got to interpret this as a biological attack. Whether the development of the virus, I should say, the release of the virus was accidental. In other words, it got outside the lab. Because the other thing he points out, he says, the danger in doing this is, he said, you're developing diseases for which there is no treatment that is known. Says, so when one of the scientists gets the disease, if it's highly transmissible, guess what happens? The thing gets loose, and there's no way of predicting what it will do or controlling what it will do. And this situation, folks, it's out of control. And like I said, I don't hate the Chinese people. I hate communism, and I hate this Chinese Communist Party. But the real fault for this lies with our own officials. Back in a moment.
It's my turn.
Here is your host for My Turn, Don Wildman.
He was a little man, stood a little over 5 feet tall, weighed not much more than a young boy. But when he rose to speak, crowds numbering in the thousands would listen in awe as he preached. Thousands upon thousands responded to his plea. As a child, he barely escaped death from burning. Some enemies of his father set fire to his home. As the family escaped, They thought all the children were safe. His mother looked back at the burning house and saw his face filled with fear pressed against a window. Some neighbors went to his rescue and pulled him from the burning house. Even though he had 18 brothers and sisters, only 4 younger than he, there was still enough love to go around for him. His mother constantly saw to it that she spent some time alone with him as well as with each of her other children. His father was a preacher, and the family had a hard time just managing to get by. As an adult, he entered the ministry and served well in the service of Christ. He came to America to preach before the United States of America came into being. Failing in his preaching ministry in America, as well as being rejected in a love affair, he packed his bags and headed home for England, a dejected man. Soon after he had returned to England, he had an experience with the carpenter of Galilee, which was not only to drastically change his life, but altered the lives of millions of other people around the world. He became so fervent with his preaching that one of the churches where he preached informed him that he was not to preach in the church again. The church was like most of the churches in England at that time, cold and formal. It wasn't long before he received notices from other churches in England that he was not to preach in them again either. And in time he found that all the churches were closed to him, and the Church of England, of which he was a member, no longer had a place for him. He was invited to preach in the open countryside to the common folk, but declined. He thought it beneath his dignity and the dignity of the good news he preached to preach in the open air. One day, however, he swallowed his pride and went into the open air to preach. It was the beginning of a way of preaching which he would follow for the rest of his life. Not only did this man influence the religious life of England, but he also fought for and helped secure better social conditions for the poor people. His followers wanted him to withdraw from the Church of England and begin a new movement, but he never consented to it. He died refusing to part with the Church of England, even though the Church of England refused to have him. John Wesley fell in love with the Galilean fisher of men at Aldersgate. This meant he fell in love with the people also. Finding the doors closed to him in the place where he wanted to proclaim the good news, he turned in another direction where his Creator had opened the door. It's an example we could still follow. For you see, when one door closes, God opens another one.
This has been My Turn with Don Wildman, a production of the American Family Association.
The Awakening. The Awakening. Download and listen at your leisure with the podcast page at AFR.net. Now, back to our host, Bishop E.W. Jackson.
Well, look, the number is 888-589-8840. I want to start taking some of your calls. I do want to introduce a couple of other brief topics. I know I've talked this entire time about China, but it's disturbing, folks. It is disturbing. In fact, here's another interesting story. The Oscars are going to have as one of their presenters this guy by the name of Donnie Yen. And Donnie Yen renounced, he's an American, of Chinese ancestry. He renounced his citizenship in 2017. He is a big supporter of Xi Jinping. But the Oscar committee has asked him to come and be a presenter for our country. He has basically denounced America and sided with this communist dictator, but the Oscars are only too happy to have him on stage. Here again, they're making a lot of money from China. So who cares what happens to America? And you put basically, in my view, a traitor, because he renounced his American citizenship. In fact, he made a statement that basically about he's Chinese all the way, something like that. But yeah, he's Chinese communist all the way. That's really what he ought to be saying. So there's just this situation is it needs some very, very serious attention before it's too late. Here's the other thing I'll mention, and thank God for Tennessee, because this stuff with all this homosexual and transgender stuff, you all saw that the this weightlifting agency that controls the powerlifting, they're now going to allow transgender men to compete against women. Yeah, that's going to work out real well. This stuff is just going crazy. In Tennessee, Governor Bill Lee has signed a law that bans these child sex changes and restricts these drag queen shows so that young children cannot attend. Because right now in Great Britain, believe it or not, folks, they had a show planned, but the public rose up against it. But they had a show planned for babies, a drag queen show for babies. I am not kidding you. I am not kidding you. Where this is supposed to be to entertain mothers and their young babies. And one of the people that they had, one of the personalities that they had, was a clown dressed up in a rainbow feathery suit with a dildo. Now, folks, forgive me for even saying it, but here again, it just goes to show the depravity that these people have in mind. And if we allow them, this is what they'll do in America. They will just drag us into the moral abyss. So thank God Tennessee is taking action, and some other states are as well. I guess last thing I'll mention, then I will come to your calls, 888-589-8840. Two things. I don't watch Chris Rock. I think he is a funny guy. I wish we could have more comedians who were clean comics, and he's not. But, you know, he did say something, that a clip I caught, which I was very glad to see. He said, "You're not going to see me on Oprah crying." He said, "I am nobody's victim." And I thought, man, that's good news, because this whole victimology thing is doing nothing but destroying us as a country. It really is turning us all into weaklings. Men can't be men because that's toxic masculinity. So thank God that he said, you know, no, I'm nobody's victim. Good for him. And Idris Elba, who is, I don't think Idris Elba is an American. I think he's British originally. I guess of his ancestral background is African. But you know, he made a statement in an interview recently. He said, "I don't want to be known as a black actor. I want to be known as a great actor." Oh my goodness gracious! They went after him with all, they meaning the leftists just went crazy. And he responded, he said, "Well, did I say anything about being ashamed of being black?" He said, "But I'm not interested in being the first black this and the first black that." He said, "I want to be a great actor." He said, and basically he just lectured him. I said, we become so obsessed with race. He said, when that's all we see, he said, and that's only skin. That's only the outward appearance. I thought, man, you know, praise God for these little sparks of sanity that we see arising everywhere. And I really believe that these sparks of sanity are going to grow into a great forest fire of sanity, Holy Ghost fire, if you will, that is going to bring this country to its senses. And not allow these crazies to drag us into the asylum with them. 888-589-8840 is the number. Let's get to your calls. Let's go to Cynthia in Kansas. Cynthia, welcome.
Yes, thank you so much, Bishop. And earlier you were saying, you know, they're in our phones, they're in all of our business, you know, in our buying up our farmlands, and you know, they're in all of our stuff. And you said, but what are they not into, you know? And so I thought about that for a split second, because that was all it took. What they are not into is our Lord Jesus Christ. These people have not an inkling of thinking of anybody else but themselves. So they do not have the capability to even think of the good Lord who has blessed them with everything they have. So that's what they don't have. That's what we have, but that's what they don't have.
Amen. Cynthia, thank you for the call. I couldn't agree with you more. And greater is he that's in us than he that's in the world, and that's why we are going to win. Thank you, Cynthia. We need always to be reminded of that. In fact, not only do they not have him, they reject him because as far as they're concerned, Xi Jinping is God. Mao was God. Their God is whoever their leader is. That's who they bow to. That's who they worship. And we worship the Lord Jesus Christ. And you are absolutely right. He cannot be defeated. Let's go to Mary in Texas. Mary, welcome.
Good morning. I thank you for taking my call today. I want to bring attention to people in the state of Oklahoma. March 7th, Oklahoma goes to the polls, and I do hope they go to the polls. Vote no. The question is to legalize recreational marijuana. They already legalized medical, but we all know what dope does to the minds of young people, old people. But I want to bring another attention about marijuana plants that they don't understand. All this drought out west, all the water tables disappearing. Well, I read an interesting article that it's the marijuana fields that are sucking the water tables. It takes, for one marijuana plant, it takes 6.5 gallons of water per day. A growing season is 150 days from June to October. And this article went on to say that it's not the agriculture commodities farmers grow, but it's the marijuana fields. California, Colorado, and Washington states already have made laws restricting the usage of groundwater and surface water. Oregon's got a law going through their Congress now to whoever supplies the water for these marijuana fields, and the marijuana field growers both have to produce documents now. They hope to prove where they're getting the water from.
Mary, I've got to take a break, but thank you very much, Mary. That was very interesting. I did not know that. In other words, you're saying that marijuana uses a lot more water, sucks a lot more water out of the soil than the crops that we grow for our food and our sustenance. That's an interesting point. I did not know that. But look, marijuana is grown for the purpose of getting people high, and you can't make that right, because we're not supposed to be drunk with wine or anything else, but to be filled with the Holy Spirit. Back in a moment.
What does the American Family Association stand for?
AFA upholds the truth that all human beings, including the unborn, are created in the image of God and are worthy of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
These values and more are part of our mission to inform, equip, and activate individuals to strengthen the moral foundations of our culture. We also support the church. We want to be a leading organization in biblical worldview training for cultural transformation. Thank you for standing with us.
Hello, I'm Sam Rohr, president of the American Pastors Network, a growing national network of pastors committed to the authority of Scripture and preaching the whole counsel of God. We believe biblical obedience is the foundation for revival, and impacting our culture for Christ is our duty. For too long, the pulpits of America have been silent on the important issues such as marriage and family and assault on our liberty. Join us in the battle for truth on Stand in the Gap weekend, Sunday evenings at 6 p.m. on American Family Radio, and visit us at AmericanPastorsNetwork.org.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
I'm Corey, and this is my story. I was going through some financial troubles paying off my credit cards. I was paying high interest rates, and it just wasn't getting any better, and I knew I had to do something. So my mom told me about Trinity, and so I decided to call. Trinity was able to do something that I couldn't. I'm paying off my debt, I'm saving thousands, and things are really looking up. I promise you guys you will not regret it when you call Trinity, because it was such a relief and less stress in my life, and it was the best thing I could have done for myself, because once I called Trinity, they took care of me, and I felt such a relief, a weight off my shoulders, and they are a Christian-based company. I love it.
If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
I'm Corey, and I'm debt-free for keeps.
1-800-788-1813.
You know, God created marriage. Dr. Greg Smalley on Focus on the Family Minute. And so the evil one, Satan, hates marriage, hates what it stands for. And I really believe a big part of what's going on in our culture right now is that Satan is so committed to destroy marriage because he fears what our marriage could be. When you have a husband and wife together, figuring out how can we use this gift that God's given us to serve others, to love others, that is one of the most powerful forces on earth. And Satan knows that, and so he tries to create chaos. He wants couples to buy into lies that they start trying to live out that completely then destroys their marriage. And I really believe it's because Satan is trying to create that chaos because he fears what we could be.
Hear more from Greg today at FamilyMinute.org.
Back to the Awakening with Bishop E.W. Jackson on American Family Radio.
And I've been saying this for a while, but I'm doubling down on it now. I really believe that if a thorough investigation were to be had, Anthony Fauci should be in jail. Because, look, not only did he lie to the American people about treatment, about a whole host of things, but now we know he lied to the American people about the origins of the virus and actually conspired with others to hide the fact that the virus came from the Wuhan laboratory. He conspired. He shut down all discussion of any other possibility because he's the big kahuna. He's the guy with a whole ton with billions of dollars to give away to scientists. You want that money? You better tell everybody, oh no, this came from nature, because he was the one who was funding, or certainly helping to fund, these communist scientists in the Wuhan laboratory. 888-589-8840 is the number. Let's come back to your calls. Let's go to Stuart in Missouri. Stuart, welcome.
Good afternoon, Brother Jackson. I love talking to you.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you.
Anyway, I really, after several months, and I've talked to you before, I really believe we are under the judgment of God, and I don't know that it's going to be reversed. And I just hope and pray that we more fervently pray for our family members and friends who don't know Christ, just like George Mueller prayed fervently for everything he got in, the 1800s England. He's such a prayer warrior. But I just really think that we don't have more than a year or two left, 3 at the most, before something big and bad happens. And I really think that most of the people in power in this country today, maybe not most, but a lot of people in the federal area especially, they are traitors. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think they are. Yeah.
Well, Stuart, look, you won't get any disagreement out of me about that. Whether we are under the judgment of God, that I would question. Whether within 2 or 3 years, if things don't turn around, something very, very bad could happen. I don't question that either. I don't. Let's put it this way: there are 2 ways in which judgment comes upon people. One is God sovereignly pours out his wrath, okay? And 2 is you reap what you sow. In other words, you bring judgment on yourself. Now, I think it's the latter that is a greater possibility even than the former. A, because I really believe that that all the wrath of God was put on Jesus, number 1. And number 2, that if the people of God are calling out and crying out to God, he says, call to me and I will answer you and show you great and mighty things which you do not know. I believe that our prayers withholds the hand of God's wrath and his judgment to give us an opportunity to do just what you suggested, which is bring more people into the kingdom, bring more people to the truth, get more people to surrender their lives to the Lordship of Jesus Christ and to submit to the truth of God's Word. So, but I think, look, so partly, Stuart, I agree with you. I just think, frankly, the judgment that we are facing right now is more judgment that we're bringing on ourselves than judgment that God is putting on us. Let's go to Angela in, where is that? Is that in Arizona?
Yes.
Hi. Hi, Angela.
Hi. Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I work for a federal agency. I actually work for Social Security, I don't mind saying. But I have been troubled lately, well, for years, but this administration is more troubling. It seems that by the end of this month, we are going to be forced to have pronoun policy training so that we will be trained to refer to whoever by their pronoun that they choose. And this bothers me because there's only two genders, and even any scientist worth their salt will not state otherwise. But there is another policy as well that troubles me that came out this last year, and I'm almost afraid to put it out there because I don't want people to realize that it's in existence. But starting the middle of last year, you can change the sex on your personal record with Social Security without medical or legal evidence. You used to have a court order. Now you can choose it, and it actually says in their frequently asked questions on their site that you no longer have to provide evidence. You just can state what your sex is, and we have to change it.
Wow. Angela, we will be praying for you and all of those like you who are really being forced into indoctrination camps. And let's face it, folks, that's what this is. You know, the Constitution actually protects our religious liberty. Have you ever heard of a training to teach people how to be sensitive to those who have faith in God? In other words, maybe not to use, profane or nasty or filthy language around them. No, because that's perfectly okay. But along comes this whole transgender movement, and suddenly we have to change our whole vocabulary in order to accommodate them. I said this on Sunday. If you all had to get a chance to, in fact, that sermon should have re-aired this morning. But I said on Sunday, when you rebel not only against God's moral law, but against God's natural law, against nature itself, which is what homosexuality and transgenderism does. It is a rebellion against nature as God ordered it. Then you are also asking nature to rebel against you. And I really believe that in part is what the Great Tribulation is going to be. It's going to be nature finally rising up and saying, you have filled the cup of sin to overflowing, and here are the consequences. And you all, if you read the book of Revelation, you know it is a horrifying picture of what people are going to go through who are in it. Thank you for the call, Angela. Let's go to Glenn in Louisiana. Glenn, welcome.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. You talking about Dr. Fauci. I looked up on the internet. I had looked up before. I'd seen this, but I looked up again today, and there are a number of articles. If you put Fauci, January 11, 2017, he was predicting that there would be a infectious disease outbreak before Trump was even inaugurated. So it wasn't, Trump didn't have anything to do with it. He was predicting it, and then it happened. So, I mean, he had to be involved in it.
Hey,
he would have known.
Yeah.
And if you look it up on the internet, you'll see several articles about it.
All right, Glenn, thank you for the call. In fact, if you read Robert Kennedy's The Real Anthony Fauci, folks, he makes clear that Fauci and Gates and a number of these other population control people have been talking about the possibility of a worldwide pandemic for a long time. And in fact, having practice sessions about, okay, what would we do even talking about censoring misinformation about it. These people have been dealing with this just in a diabolical way for a long time, which, right, does make you wonder just how accidental this could be. 888-589-8840 is the number. But thank you for the call, Glenn. Let's go to Tim in Tennessee. Tim, welcome.
Hey, how you doing today, Bishop?
Great, Tim. How you doing?
I'm doing well. You were talking about how China gets information and so forth. We've heard through the TikTok apps and all these types of different things. I bought a drone from DJI, and invariably it's a Chinese made, which I probably didn't research that part of it so much, but I had a friend refer it. And, I've used it and inadvertently crashed it. And what happens is with that, still functions well. But the calibration for the backup, right, it wouldn't back up. So they said, hey, you can just download the app, right? So I downloaded the app, but I go through and you read all the stuff that usually nobody wants to sit down and read. But in order for you to use that drone or to go through and calibrate it, you have to give your actual root password to your computer for them, to go through the calibration process. But that would be the same password, that anybody could then open your computer and go through and see whatever information you happen to have on your computer. So just as an FYI, they're looking at that way as well. You're invariably going to, need some sort of calibration or so forth on your drone. But you give them access to your computer just to get access, to a calibration process.
Tim,
or other simple.
Got it, Tim. Thank you for the call. Well, folks, there you go. There's another example of it. We do have to watch what we're buying, particularly when it comes to technology, because they're backdooring a lot of this stuff to make sure that just think about this, folks. God forbid, but in a time of war, think about the ability to kind of know what the American people are doing because you've infiltrated all their technology. Let's go to Roy in New Hampshire. Roy, welcome.
Hello, Bishop. I don't know anybody who hasn't gone to Harbor Freight and gotten a one-use tool that was made in China. But I remember quite clearly right at the tail end of President Obama's term, and when President Trump was coming in, that Obama tried to flood the country with Chinese-made tires. And President Trump put a kibosh to that. I also remember quite recently they wanted to build a rail system out in California, above-ground rail system, and there was some discrepancies about the steel coming from China. China should not be manufacturing steel to be used in our critical infrastructure.
Wow. Roy, man, you crowned it today. You hit it absolutely right. Because all we're doing is we're basically building a system for our own demise. I mean, it's just, man, it's chilling. It's chilling. Well, folks, that's going to do it for the day. But listen, look to the hills from whence comes our help. It comes from the Lord. So you step up. Stand up, step up, speak up, refuse to back up, because we cannot be defeated if we will not quit, because we are on God's side.
All right, partner, we're clear.
All right, Randy. God bless. Talk to you tomorrow.
Yes, sir. Have a good day.
You too.
The American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Abraham Hamilton III.
If you really want to see the tides turn